And welcome back to the Afrolit Digital Hub, where we take time out of our day to read seminal works by great African thinkers and philosophers that will help free our minds and help us toward the movement of our African liberation. And this is brought to you by Ubuntu Learning Solutions, where we are improving human performance and human benignity. We have been reading Chinweizu's Decolonizing the African Mind. And we left off where he was talking about economic development, an ambiguous misnomer. Then he talks about maldevelopment versus development. And I like how he was separating the two out to show how genuine development generates these things, whereas maldevelopment generates these things. And so that was really powerful how he laid that out. And we left off looking at the maldeveloping world. And in our last talk, I was talking about Dr. Jacob Carruthers. And I think I said that the name of his book was Intellectual Tyranny, but it's not. It's called Intellectual Warfare. And it is a fantastic read. And I had mentioned his book because I was making the connection of if you understand the European and if you understand what Dr. Marimba Ani calls their asili, which is the essence of their culture, then you would actually understand more of why they do the things they do and say the things they say and behave the way that they behave. It's a part of their asili. And Jacob Carruthers, in his book, looked at what he called work and the European worldview. And this really opened my eyes because Chinweizu was comparing these two recipes, right? Here we have the recipe of capitalism and we have the recipe of communism. Okay, they're both out of the European mind. A lot, I was listening to, I want to say, it'll come to me, but they probably studied some of what the African culture did when the Greeks were, setting up their civilization on top of Egyptian civilization. Really, we were the ones that brought civilization to the world. The Greeks, so-called, copied, stolen legacy, if you will, and then after they copied, then they try to say that we have no culture, we didn't do anything. It's crazy. But when the Greeks were setting up their civilization and their way of doing things, we have to keep in mind their asili, right? And so when we look at these two formulas coming out of the European mind, we have to get at the understanding of it. So what I'm trying to say is that they could not create a communal economy because of the nature of how they are, right? They're not communal people at all. So when they talk about work, it is not with the same morality and ethical thinking that we would apply to work, right? We value work because it contributes to our group, right? Everyone has their part in the group. Oh, I remember who I was listening to, and I want to say his name correctly. He was a doctor, Opie. Okay, I'm going to pull up his name because now it just came to me who I was listening to. So let me pull that up. because this guy is brilliant. I recommend that you listen to his video. Okay, his name is Professor Coffee, Kofi, Asara, Asara, Opoku, Opoku. That's who I was listening to. And I was watching him on YouTube, and he was talking about African wisdom for leaders. And that's where he pretty much was saying how the Greeks, that stole from the Egyptians when they were trying to mimic and create their civilization, they couldn't do it in a moral way, right? Okay, he didn't say it exactly like that. I'm paraphrasing, but that's a part of it. All right, so I pulled up Jacob Carruthers's section on work and the European worldview, right? So the value of work or labor has received universal acceptance among modern European thinkers, right? These modern thinkers. And everyone, whenever they hear the word modernity or modern, they automatically think European. According to both capitalists and communists. Now, keep in mind, Chinwe Zhu had also talked about the recipe of capitalism, the recipe of communism, right? So both capitalists and communists, work is the source of economic value and moral virtue. Okay, so when you think of capitalists, work, there you can't have capitalism without work, right? When you think of communism, work, you can't have communism without work. Even in the African way and communal economics, it involves work, right? But it has a moral virtue. Okay? When you think about capitalists and communists, work is the source of economic value and moral virtue, but not in the same sense, right? Because the way that they have set up their moral system, it has no morality whatsoever. It's despiritualized, it's demoralized. So Jacob Carruthers says, indeed, Max Weber saw the work ethic and the spirit of capitalism as synonymous terms. Okay, so work ethic and capitalism means the same thing. Marx made no secret of the fact that the workers are the only revolutionary class within modern industrial society. And the Communist Manifesto issues the call to revolution in the name of working men. And Carruthers puts in parentheses, no male chauvinism intended by either Marx or me. And he says, ironically, the capitalists who proclaim the virtue of work the loudest, right? So they do it more than the communists, do not work. Yet they receive all the value. And when you think about these bourgeoisie, these elitist classes, how they like to go around and preach, merit and work, yet they do not work. You see them on the golf course or hanging out on their boat or, at home. They don't work, yet they receive all the value. And in their mind, they're making the decisions. So for them, that's work, but they're not doing any physical labor. And it says, furthermore, under the capitalist regime, the workers receive no value, as the manifesto points out. We must also remark in passing that the leaders and spokesmen for communism, like the capitalists, do not work. I'm like, wow. When I read that, I was like, oh my gosh, here we have these loud mottos being shouted out, right? And when you unpack it, you realize, wait, they don't work. These people that are saying you must have a strong work ethic, you must work for merit and grow and receive your reward by the sweat of your brow, and yet they're not doing it. I I was blown away when I read this. It seems that work, though highly valued, is reserved for the masses, while the elites concentrate on ruling. So, this is where you see elections happening, where they're voting in these really interesting characters that you're saying, how can you put such a person like that in office? And I was listening to Dr. Obatashaka, where he explained the Aryan culture. He said, in Aryan culture, the strongest, best leaders are the ones who are the most vicious, the most plunderous, the most egregious. They choose that person as their leader. And it's like, wow, it has no morality or righteousness about it. Whereas in the African way, the strongest, best person for leadership is the most spiritual person, the most just, the most moral, the most righteous, the most balanced, the most harmonious person. That's who we want to lead us. And so when you see that, what Dr. Oba Tashaka calls the choice between two cultures, you understand, oh, this is how they can elect someone of this character as their leader, as their president. It's amazing. So I used to get upset at elections, but I don't get upset anymore because I realize I'm living in a modern Euro-American society, and it is demoralized and it is despiritualized. And so the things that are happening through the Aryan influence. And so once you understand that, you don't get upset anymore. You realize, okay, I have to mobilize people of African descent to really start coming together. That's the goal. We need to come together and do what we are designed to do. Like Professor Smalls said, the white man is doing what he is designed to do. It is the black man that is not doing what he is designed to do. We're busy trying to be the white man when we need to go back to our creator, God-given purpose, right? The originator. Because when you think about God, it's not God in the way that Europeans define God. I'm talking about the originator, the original source. Okay, I just want to share this last piece and then we'll get back to Chinwezu. So he says right here that it seems that work, though highly valued, is reserved for the masses, while the elites concentrate on ruling. But let us not too hastily confirm the contradiction. Perhaps there is a closer relationship between work and dominion than the satisfaction of the appetites of the ruling classes. The contradiction, however, does appear awesome. The work ethic is said to have reached its peak in modern times among a people who in antiquity were famous for loving indolence. And when I looked up indolence, you know how they like to say indulge yourself. Indolence is avoidance of activity or exertion, laziness. So here, the work ethic is said to have reached its peak in modern times among a people who in antiquity were famous for loving indolence, right? They don't like to work. All right, here is Tacitus asserts that concerning the German, he thinks it tame and spiritless to accumulate slowly by the sweat of his brow work what can be got quickly by the loss of little blood. Now, when I read that, I was like, oh my gosh. Concerning the German, and German has that Aryan root, right? So I just want to put this here. Oh, I can't. Okay. Okay, so the German here. Will it let me? Yes. So concerning the German, that Aryan, right? He thinks it tame and spiritless to accumulate slowly by the sweat of his brow. And that's what we were taught, you know. You work hard, you gain that experience, you get your reward. They don't agree with that. They say it's spiritless. How could that be spiritless? And they say that's tame. Wow. And they say, why do that when you can get something quickly by the loss of little blood? Like, wow. So they're just willing to just take it, lose a little bit of blood, but take it. In fact, Tacitus, or is it Tacitus, attributes this in part to the following inherent characteristic. They are less able to endure toil or fatiguing tasks. We, on the other hand, we're able to endure toil or fatiguing tasks. We can be out in the sun all day. They just whip us and beat us, and we're out there picking cotton, picking tobacco, or, being a blacksmith, whatever it is that we were doing. We are hard workers, but they are less able to endure toil or fatiguing tasks. When not engaged in warfare, they spend a certain amount of time in hunting, but much more in idleness. And it makes you think like, wow, that's why they always have these military bases all over the world. Whenever they're not in warfare, right? Like the current times that we're in now, there's two wars going on, right? And if they're not engaged there, they spend a certain amount of time hunting. And if you are a person of color living in these modern European places, you're probably being hunted by the cops. So that's the hunting, but much more in idleness. Because they love to just hang out on their boats or hang out at the grill or drink or whatever. The Germans have no taste for peace. Look at that. Have no taste for peace. And this is Tacitus, Tacitus, saying this. They have no taste for peace. And their major source of wealth was plunder. Their major source of wealth was plunder. Yet, in spite of the natural disinclination of the German people to toil, and even though the elites avoid labor, work is enthralled. So that's why they say they have a forked tongue, right? They'll go around and say, you're the lazy one, and you're the one who doesn't want to work, and you are always looking for a handout, looking for a job. And it's like, no, actually, no. It's you are the one that stole all the resources. You are the one that is, of war-mindedness. You can't even toil for long periods of time. You can't, you easily fatigue. And yet you're reversing it and saying all of that is on me. It's kind of like what Gordon, I believe his name is Lewis Gordon, Dr. Lewis Gordon was saying, is that it's extreme projection. It's like narcissism. There's a word he used, I'm going to find that word, that defines white supremacy. And it's a psychological disorder. It really is, right? The love of conquest and domination, which seemed to be the ethos of the Northwestern Europeans, right? When we say ethos, that's a part of their European asili. It seems to be the ethos of the Northwestern Europeans would naturally lead to the opposite result, a praise of indolence, for example. One notices the same nature characterized in the folk literature of other Aryan people, such as the ancient Iranians and the classical Greeks, from whence then cometh the work ethic. The answer to this question can be found in the early myth and lore of the Aryan people themselves. Everywhere among them, we find that their leaders and prophets who were worshipped as conquerors are the patrons of industry and hard work. Before proceeding with the review of the Aryan antiquity with respect to the work ethic, let us focus on the differences between the Aryan worldview and the African worldview. And he says Diop has summarized the contrast thusly. All right, so I just wanted to share that piece. If you have not read Intellectual Warfare, put that on your reading list. It's amazing. Like, I am so thankful for all of the work that our ancestors have done, that our leaders and our elders have done. Like Chinwezu is still with us, so he is an elder. I appreciate the work that they have put into collecting the information for us, because history is the foundation of your mental processes. And I learned that from a book that Dr. Amos Wilson recommended. I think it's this one right here. And the name of this book is called Cognitive Development, Its Cultural and Social Foundations. And there's a page in here that talks about history right here, the historical process. Let me zoom in there. Okay, so the historical process in which a child's, let's see, Vygotsky and Luria stressed that mental development must be viewed as a historical process in which the child's social and non social environment induces the development of mediating processes and the various higher mental functions. So, history is a part of your cognitive development, right? It's a part of your higher order and lower order thinking. So when history is removed from us, it impacts our thinking. And if you don't believe me, look at the devastating underdevelopment that has been done on the continent of Africa deliberately, starting with the removal of our historical agency. And so that impacted our cognitive development. Even here in the United States, go into some of the poorest rural areas or the poorest urban areas where the curriculum has just been deliberately distorted, removing our historical agency and our historical consciousness, thus impacting our mental processes. So I'm thankful for these ancestors and elders that have done the work to try to repair that historical timeline for us, because like what Ivan Van Sertima was saying, Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, he said, our history just has been blown up to smithereens, pieces everywhere. And it took that collection of elders and ancestors, scholars, to work together to try to piece it together, to get at the truth, right? Because right now we are functioning in Ma'afa, which is a big lie. Like Dr. Leonard Jeffries said, we are in a lie. And so we have to constantly look for the truth. So I am thankful to get that historical consciousness piece restored so that we can get our mental processes back. That is a part of our liberation. So everything that has been done, even, it's scattered all over the Americas and the southern part of the world. All of the work, when you put it together collectively, it pieces together that timeline that will help us for Sankofa, that Sankofa process. In order to be able to participate in that Sankofa process, we do need history. We need our knowledge of history. Okay, so here we have Chinwezu looking at the maldeveloping world. And he says the practice of referring to third world countries as developing countries, though entrenched, is misleading. It is misleading, right? Because we're saying, oh, it's a developing country. But, according to the definitions earlier, we see that it's not really developing, it's maldeveloping. So some of these countries we could probably refer to as maldeveloping countries. There are very few developing countries in the third world. Most are actually maldeveloping. In fact, developing countries are so few among them that it would be more correct to refer to the third world as the maldeveloping world. Wow. See, I made that inference and I didn't even read that section yet. So this is what I talk about when I teach reading. If you all don't know, I am a reading specialist. And so when I'm working with students, I'm teaching them that as they're reading, they should be making inferences based on the writing style, based on what has been shared with us so far, we can kind of make some predictions as to where Chinwezu is going. And when you can make predictions, that means that you and the author are on the same wavelength. So you are walking away with the meaning that he intended you to walk away with, not something that you are interjecting. For example, um, you might say, oh, well, I feel as though, no, there's no feeling here. What is stated, what is claimed. We're not interjecting any of our feelings here. And that's the problem, I think, with society right now, is that we put too much emphasis in the human faculties, specifically in that emotional piece, where we don't get into our moral faculties and our divine faculties. And so we have to put that emotional piece in check. And I learned this from Ra'un Nefer Amen. And if you don't know him, you need to know him. Ra, R-A-Un, U-N, Nefer, N-E-F-E-R, Amen, A-M-E-N. And he is the Shechem or Shechem. So we call him Sus, S-U-S. Put that man in your life. An example of the few developing countries in the third world is China. Okay. During the first 30 years of the People's Republic, it concentrated upon a total social transformation which placed great emphasis on the development of a national industrial culture anchored on agriculture and heavy industries. To make this possible, the rate of national savings and investment was kept high, and only in the last few years has investment emphasis begun to shift towards consumer industries. In stark contrast to China is Nigeria. Okay, so now he's comparing China to Nigeria. An excellent example of the maldeveloping majority. In its years of independence, Nigeria has concentrated on developing its consumer appetite for imports and has used its vast oil revenues to feed this habit. It has little stomach for saving and investment and no inclination towards building a productive economy. It has only now begun to establish a steel industry that may someday provide essential inputs for a heavy industry. Any need for some fundamental social transformation to prepare its citizens for a national industrial culture has gone unrecognized. But why has maldevelopment been so popular in the third world? What is the paramount desire for third world elites? And how does cargo cult maldevelopment satisfy it? And that's another thing that I was listening to. Wonderful woman in South Africa, and I want to say her last name is Tishabala Kanyasili Litchfield Tishabala, and she was talking about how we have this appetite for material things. Where did that appetite come from? It's very selfish. Why do we want to wear somebody else's name on us so badly? Like, why are we running after European luxury items? That has nothing to do with us. And it makes sense. So this is what Chinwezu is asking here. What is the paramount desire of third world elites, these bourgeoisie, who want to be elite instead of common? And how does cargo cult maldevelopment satisfy it? And he goes on to say, contrary to popular belief, the paramount desire of third world elites is not development, but the perpetuation of their rule, with minimum disruption to their enjoyment of its, is it prerequisites? Perquisites. Perquisites. Now that is a word that I need to look up. I don't even know if I'm saying that word correctly. So Perquisites. Amos Wilson always said that he does not mind using words that require you to use a dictionary. So that's one thing when you're reading these types of texts, try to have your mobile device near where you can look a word up. And let's see, how do we pronounce that word here? Perquisite. Okay, so perquisites. Okay, and it says another term for perk. Oh, perks. Wow. See, we just learned something. Okay, maybe I've heard the word, but I didn't know how to pronounce it. So that is the issue here. Huh? And when you really get to the heart of the matter, right? So it's they don't really want to develop. They want to perpetuate their rule. They want to stay in charge. They don't want to have disruption. They want to change the constitution and change the laws so that they can stay in power with minimum disruption so that they can enjoy the perks of rulership, right? They can enjoy the presidential plane and the presidential palace and all the food and, being praised. However, to legitimize their rule in the minds of populations hungry for material prosperity, these elites have found it necessary to proclaim development as the principal enterprise of the state. But believing that those they rule would not submit to the rigors of genuine development, and being themselves thoroughly disinclined to embark upon a process which might put at risk their enjoyment of power, they have sought some strategy of pseudo development. Oh my gosh. One which would give the appearance of development by providing some of its fruits, yet save them the rigorous genuine development. For this purpose, cargo cult maldevelopment has so far provided adequate. So when you wish for these cargo ships to come and bring things from the magical spiritual gods, that helps with the pseudo development illusion. Interesting. For this purpose, cargo cult development has so far proved adequate. All it requires of them is to secure funds to pay for sufficient imports to satisfy the population's hunger for consumer goods. Wow, so we never really produce, we just consume. Hence the enormous appetite of third world regimes for foreign exchange. This is preferably to be obtained from foreign aid, foreign loans, and from payments for exports of raw materials, sources which would not require them to tinker with the colonial economy, let alone undertake fundamental social reorganization. Consequently, third world development strategies have tended to concentrate on how to obtain such funds for importing cargoes of Western consumer goods and on building the infrastructures for distributing and using them. This sort of development naturally suits a West which is interested in markets for its manufacturers and sources of raw materials, but not in the emergence of competing productive capacity or the proliferation of industrial powers. Such a dovetailing of interests has produced an alliance between the industrial and financial corporations of the West, the aid agencies of Western governments, and third world leaders, an alliance for the racket of promoting cargo cult maldevelopment in the third world. Gosh, interesting. So, this sort of development naturally suits a West which is interested in markets for its manufacturers. So, if we are constantly looking for outside aid, these outside goods, then the West will love that because, hey, we're producing it, you buy it for us. But we have to buy it with loans. Wow. And sources of raw materials, but not in the emergence of competing productive capacity. So they don't want you to have a competing productive capacity or the proliferation of industrial powers. They don't want that. So as long as you are constantly looking for consumer goods from the outside and you're not producing yourself. The West loves that. So, such a dovetailing of interests has produced an alliance. So, now we have an alliance between the industrial and financial. So, the industrial, where China does a lot of the production, right? Industrial and financial in the West, European and Euro American does a lot of that financial piece. So we have the industrial and the financial corporations of the West, the aid agencies. Now, here we got aid. We're pouring in all these the aid agencies of Western governments and third world leaders, an alliance for the racket of promoting cargo cult maldevelopment in the third world. Oh, when you read stuff like this, it gives you a headache because it's like, why are we doing this? This is madness. Okay, we will stop here and we will continue reading in our next read. Thanks for watching.